Coming up on Arirang News, South Korea's economy grew in the third quarter by just 0.4%, the slowest growth in about a decade, and putting it farther away from the government's target for the year. President Moon unveils a plan for the city of Gunsan to rebound as a hub for making electric cars. The plan will see hundreds of millions of dollars invested, leading to the creation of much-needed jobs. And the prime ministers of South Korea and Japan agree that their countries need to work to improve their badly strained relations. That meeting seems to have made it more likely for a summit meeting between the two sides before the year is out. It's 4:00 p.m. here in Seoul. Thanks for tuning in to Arirang News. I'm Devin Whiting. South Korean Prime Minister Lee Nak-yeon sat down in Tokyo this morning with Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, and the two agreed on the need to do something to improve their countries' ties, which have been badly strained for months over trade and historical issues. Our Kim Mo-gyun has this story.
South Korea and Japan agreed on the need for a breakthrough in the current stalled relations between the two countries on Thursday. Seoul's first Vice Foreign Minister Cho Se-young, who took part in the closed-door meeting, said that South Korean Prime Minister Lee Nak-yeon expressed Seoul's willingness to mend ties with Tokyo, and so did the Japanese Prime Minister.
The prime ministers of the two nations agreed that they cannot leave the current strained ties unaddressed as they are important neighbors.
He also delivered a personal letter written by President Moon Jae-in, which included a congratulatory message over Japanese Emperor Naruhito's enthronement and the need to work together to address issues of conflict. Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe expressed his gratitude and agreed to facilitate dialogue at various levels, including discussions on North Korea.
The two prime ministers also agreed on the importance of seeking bilateral cooperation and trilateral coordination involving the United States to tackle North Korea's nuclear issue.
During the talks, which lasted for 20 minutes, Prime Minister Abe also stressed that the two Asian neighbors should stay faithful to their 1965 treaty, which Tokyo claims has normalized ties and settled all issues of compensation for victims of colonial rule. Lee said that Seoul has been respecting the treaty just as Tokyo did and will continue to do so, expressing hopes that the two sides can continue to overcome their differences. However, regarding the possibility of a Moon-Abe summit, the first Vice Foreign Minister said that such specific discussions were not included during the talks, but did not rule out the possibility of such a summit. Kim Mo-gyun, Arirang News.
So there was no mention in Thursday's meeting of a summit between President Moon and Prime Minister Abe, but South Korea's foreign minister apparently thinks the meeting did help narrow the gap. Shin Se-min has the details.
Not a single mention of the next high-level meeting between South Korea and Japan from the face-to-face between the two prime ministers on Thursday. But the general consensus is that the talks may lead to more active discussions between the two sides. South Korean Foreign Minister Kang Kyung-hwa on the same day said that while the two sides still have differences, they seem to have narrowed the gap to a certain extent and said they now have a deeper understanding of each other. As for the possible summit between President Moon Jae-in and Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, a presidential aide this week said that South Korean leader could possibly meet with Abe on the sidelines of the APEC summit, which may even be attended by the U.S. president. But the official said that meeting, however, might be under the condition that Japan takes some visible measures on the issue of Korean victims of forced labor during the Japanese occupation of Korea and steps to roll back its decision on export curbs. And with the leaders, both Moon and Abe, showing strong determination to work out their relations before the end of their terms, it is likely that such a meeting may take place sometime this year with some key dates lined up. One of which, the termination date of the bilateral intelligence sharing pact known as GSOMIA, which falls on November 22nd. Looking ahead, the prospective dates where the two leaders may cross paths is on the sidelines of a series of global events lined up next month. They include the ASEAN +3 meeting in Thailand and the APEC economic leaders meeting in Chile, where the Korean president's attendance was confirmed by the organizer earlier this month. If that is the case, that face-to-face between Moon and Abe would be their first since September last year, when they met on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
North Korea has repeated its call for the U.S. to come back to the nuclear talks with a different approach by the end of the year. The two sides have been unable to make progress in the negotiations for some time now. Our Oh Jung-hee has the latest.
North Korea has again urged the United States to come up with a new and creative approach for their denuclearization talks by the end of 2019. On Thursday, North Korea's state-run Korean Central News Agency carried a statement from Kim Kye-kwan, advisor to the North's foreign ministry. Kim said the friendship and trust between North Korean leader Kim Jong-un and U.S. President Donald Trump is still strong. However, he claimed Washington's policymakers remain hostile toward the North with, quote, ideological prejudice and Cold War-era thoughts. Saying where there's a will, there's a way, the advisor stressed Pyongyang wants to see how wisely Washington will act through the end of the year. The statement comes 3 weeks after working-level negotiations between the two sides collapsed in Stockholm. The North Korean side walked out, with Pyongyang's envoy Kim Myung-gil stating that the U.S. came to the table with no new calculation. It's too early to tell what North Korea has in mind with Thursday's statement, but some watchers suggest the North may be wanting to hold another Kim-Trump summit before the end of the year, as the statement highlights the personal ties between Kim and Trump. Some also believe Pyongyang is showing a willingness to sit down for another round of working-level talks with the U.S. within this year. On Wednesday, Sweden's special envoy to the Korean Peninsula said his country will invite North Korea and the U.S. to negotiate again at a time and place that suits both sides. Oh Jung-hee, Arirang News.
A book coming out next month about President Trump is set to reveal the content of a letter he received from Kim Jong-un. If reports are true, Kim's letter not only takes up the nuclear issue, but is of a personal nature as well. Our Hong Yu tells us more.
North Korean leader Kim Jong-un said his father and former leader Kim Jong-il told him to never give up the North's nuclear arsenal. This is what President Trump's son-in-law and senior advisor Jared Kushner told gov't-led in an interview. Wed is a professional biographer who is releasing his new book called Inside Trump's White House in November. In the book, Wed cited Kushner when writing about Kim's letter to Trump. Kushner said Kim's letter shows the North Korean leader wants to be friends with President Trump, but it also contained his father's dying instruction to never give up their weapons stockpile as it's the only thing that can keep him safe. Kushner added that denuclearization is not an easy decision for Kim to make, since it is related to his father. Kushner also added that President Trump is like a new father to Kim Jong-un, making it harder for him to decide. If what Kushner says is true, it portrays a different version of the wishes of the North's former leaders than what had been previously thought. Kim had said during his visit to China last year that it is his consistent position to focus on realizing the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula was in accordance with the wishes of Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-il. In the book, Wed also included an interview with Trump in which he showed off his North Korea policy through the release of Kim Jong-un's letter. Trump defined Obama's diplomacy with North Korea as a failure, saying Obama was most concerned about the possibility of war with North Korea. Hong Yu, Arirang News.
South Korea's GDP in the third quarter grew more slowly than projected, putting the economy on track for its worst annual performance in about a decade. Kim Hae-sung reports.
South Korea's economy grew 0.4% on quarter in the July to September period. That's lower than the 1% growth tallied in the second quarter.
By spending, construction investment contracted, export growth increased, private investment edged up 0.1%, while government consumption grew 1.2%.
Private consumption in the third quarter slowed from a 0.7% rise in the second quarter, making it the slowest pace of growth since the first quarter of 2016. The Bank of Korea attributed slower private consumption to falling spending on semi-durable goods like clothing. Government spending increased 1.2%, but its contribution to South Korea's GDP growth fell 1 percentage point compared to the second quarter. Facilities investment grew 0.5%, but construction investment tumbled 5%. Exports, a key driver of South Korea's growth, increased 4% on improving shipments of semiconductors and autos compared with the previous quarter. Exports have fallen for 10 consecutive months since last November amid slowing global trade and the ongoing U.S.-China trade dispute. Imports grew around 1%. Real gross national income edged up 0.1% on quarter. The last time South Korea recorded annual growth below 2% was during the 2008 global financial crisis when it posted GDP growth of just 0.8%. The local economy is unlikely to reach Bank of Korea's growth target of 2.2% this year, and it'll have to expand 1% in the fourth quarter to hit 2%. 김혜성, Arirang News.
President Moon has praised the southwestern port city of Kunsan for its initiative to rebound as a specialized center for making electric cars. The president laid out a roadmap for his 6th regional job creation project in Gunsan at a commemorative ceremony earlier this afternoon. It aims to revive the Kunsan economy by expanding the electric car industry, helping it recover after the shutdown of GM Korea's plant there last year and the loss of 2,800 jobs. Electric car clusters will be created in the area, led by the South Korean auto parts supplier Myeongsin, which bought the Gunsan plant from GM Korea. By 2022, the plan would see investment worth about $352 million and the creation of around 2,000 jobs. With the city already home to a test site for self-driving cars and an institute for developing related technology, President Moon expressed high hopes that Kunsan will be able to rapidly advance as a leading city in the industry. President Moon has proposed that South Korea and Spain enhance their cooperation in overseas construction, the digital economy, and renewable energy. The president made the comments this morning at a bilateral business forum in Seoul with King Felipe VI of Spain. President Moon highlighted the immense potential the two countries have in joint construction projects overseas, with Korea's strength in construction and financing, and Spain in the design and management of facilities.
양국은 올해 초 해외 건설 분야에서 중남미, 아시아 지역의 공동 진출을 촉진하고 철도 항공을 비롯한 교통 분야에서 공기업 간 협력을 확대하기로 했습니다.
President Moon also said the two countries will have great synergy in the digital economy. He said they both have outstanding ICT infrastructure and can mutually prosper through partnerships in 5G-based services like autonomous cars and smart cities. They'll also work together in battling climate change by working to replace fossil fuels with renewable energy. South Korean chipmaker SK Hynix saw its operating profit in the third quarter plunge 93% from a year ago because of falling chip prices. The world's second largest chipmaker reported Thursday that its Q3 earnings were roughly $400 million, its smallest quarterly profit in 3 years. Sales went up slightly by 6% on quarter to $5.8 billion, but were down 40% compared to the record high figure a year ago. The company said demand had started to pick up, but said there was a glut in supply. Time now for an in-depth look at the market news this afternoon, and for that I'm joined on the line by Mr. Daniel Yu, global strategist at Yuanta Securities. Mr. Yu, thank you for coming on today.
Good afternoon.
Well, third quarter earnings coming in on Wall Street. Some big companies came in lower than expected, a few much higher, but stocks were up overall. What's the story in the global markets today?
Yes. Despite the concerns about the Brexit uncertainties, overall market in general were pretty much flat to slightly rising trend is shown. If you look at the Dow Jones, it was up about 0.17%. S&P was up 0.28%. Nasdaq was up about 0.2%. European market, despite these concerns, pretty much flat. Euro was about up only slightly by 0.06%, and DAX, German index, was up 0.34%. In terms of these numbers that are coming out from U.S., Tesla soared its sale prices by 21%. So most of the geopolitical risk is still there, but nevertheless, earning results are coming in better than expected in many cases, and that is actually winning the uncertainties. And that is actually showing in the right direction in terms of share prices. Also, the U.S.-China trade negotiation seems to be going in the right direction. That is adding to the positive news. As for the Asian markets, pretty much mixed. Korea was down most of the day, but at the end, it closed with a slightly up trend. And also Japan was up about 0.5%. Also, China is slightly down, but nevertheless, it's recovering from the lows of today.
As you mentioned, the Kospi down for most of the day today. A lot of foreign investors, though, they say, are buying back in. What's happening in Korean stocks today, and what areas stand out to you?
Yes, if you look at the overall valuations of Korean market, it is definitely cheap in terms of price to book valuations. If you look at the Kospi, it is trading at only 0.83 times a book. Also, the Kosdaq has been coming down quite a bit, so now it's trading at only about 2.4 times a book value. So most of the earnings seems to be bottoming out, as you've seen it in the share price movement of SK Hynix. In general, earnings drop that has been seen in the last 2 years is probably bottoming out as of third quarter, and then maybe starting next quarter start to show some side trend, and then maybe recovery in next year. General expectation for the earnings recovery for next year is very strong for Kospi by 19% and Kosdaq by 30% in terms of YOY growth numbers after quite sharp drop of earnings this year. All this is because probably the key sector is the IT and bio sector. These are the two main sectors that suffered quite significantly because of the drop in prices, chip prices, as well as some of the concern about the new drugs rollout. But overall, it seems that the numbers are bottoming out. And if that's the case, then next year we're looking at probably a very strong equity market for Korea.
Well, now, more broadly for Asia, the IMF has released a report saying growth in the region is slowing down more than expected. Generally, what's the outlook for Asia among global institutions, and how does Korea figure into this?
Sure. IMF said that they lowered the Asia growth rate expectation for this year from 5.4 to 5.0%. And for the next year, they lowered it by 0.3 percentage point. And also, as for Korea, they lowered much higher by 0.6 percentage point. The issues of the Korean-Japan dispute was raised as well from IMF. And also, IMF said that they have lowered because of the uncertainty regarding China risk and Hong Kong protest risk and uncertainty in the Middle East and higher consumer debt level and corporate debt level of Asian countries. And they also mentioned some things about weather changes and natural disaster problems as a future risk. And IMF is basically asking this, because of these lowering numbers, they're asking for further rate cuts, additional money supply for the major central banks in Asia. And also they're actually asking for further budget increase to boost economies. We think, though, the Asian economy is not going to go through the recessionary period next year because, as what IMF is asking, the further rate cuts as well as the additional budget supply could be positive news for the economic recovery going into the next year. At least it's not going to go to the recessionary territories. The numbers should be fairly flat for the YOY for the next year, we think. So if that's the case, then yes, Korea seems to be much lower than expected, and also overall numbers are lower than expected for this year, but at least it is bottoming out, and maybe next year, including Korea, Asian market should do quite nice recovery.
Got it. All right, Mr. Yu, that's where we'll have to leave it today. Thanks so much. We appreciate your insights.
Thank you very much.
Now, culture ministers and senior officials from South Korea and the Association of Southeast Asian Nations have agreed to work together on boosting cultural exchanges. The South Korean culture minister was speaking this morning at a meeting with the ASEAN side. Take a listen.
Through cultural exchanges and cooperation, South Korea and ASEAN are trying to understand one another, find joy together, and share economic prosperity.
The meeting was held in Gwangju at the Asian Culture Center, where ministers agreed to explore various cultural joint projects to provide more opportunities for future generations. President Moon also sent a congratulatory message in which he expressed hope for cultural resources and technology from Korea and ASEAN to come together to preserve heritage and grow their ties. This coming Sunday marks the 100th anniversary of South Korea filming its first movie. And here's our Jong-un with a part 2 of our special series to commemorate a century of South Korean cinema.
Korea cinema was first born at this theater in 1919 with a premiere of the country's first movie, Fight for Justice. Now 100 years later, no movies are screened here anymore, but the cinema has become a museum dedicated to the history of the film industry. Dansungsa, located at the intersection of Jongno Samga in downtown Seoul, is welcoming visitors, only this time it's for the purpose of introducing the history of South Korea's film industry. When it opened as South Korea's first motion picture house in 1907, Dansungsa was the country's hottest cinema. But over the last century, the cinema has faced crisis after crisis, the biggest in the late 1990s amid the opening of big multiplexes by South Korea's entertainment giants. It tried to reopen as a multiplex in 2005, but couldn't stay afloat. The place was closed for years, but a museum was built to educate people how the South Korean film industry's 100-year-old journey. Legendary director Im Gon-taek remembers the days he spent at Dansungsa.
When the movie 서편제 premiered here and got big, I was always on the second floor of this historic building to watch the crowds coming in. At that time, I sometimes wondered how stupid I was, but now I think of it, it was one of the biggest gifts of my career.
The museum, which is located below ground level, has more than 5,000 pieces that represents the history of the South Korean film industry, including original posters, scripts, and filming equipment. It has a memorial zone for directors, actors, and actresses, and people can also see an original photograph of the newly constructed theater in 1934. After it was burned down during Japan's colonial rule of the peninsula. To preserve history, it has left one theater inside for visitors to watch classic films for free on special occasions. The Dansungsa Cinema History Hall will focus on educating those interested in films, and for that purpose, the organizers plan to host free group viewings for students once every week. Jong-un, Arirang News.
Today, October 24th, is United Nations Day, a day to celebrate the UN's efforts to build global peace and cooperation. And at a forum held by a UN agency and Arirang TV, an expert emphasized the need for stronger cooperation between all actors in this rapidly changing digital society. Oh Soo-young reports.
All sectors of society need to play a role to ensure no one is left behind amid disturbances and changes brought by the digital revolution. In an interview with Arirang TV, Dr. David Horan, a researcher at the UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network, stressed the need for sturdier partnerships within and between countries to achieve the 17 UN Sustainable Development Goals adopted in 2016.
Because we're at the beginning of, a digital revolution, but that's going to take off. We need in place social safety nets, good governance structures.
Under the mantra of leaving no one behind, the UN's SDGs aim to eliminate extreme poverty and hunger, achieve low-carbon economies, as well as peaceful and just societies and ensure human rights for all. But to bring about transformative steps towards these goals, collaboration is needed between multiple sectors and interest groups, as well as governments. Horan says governments should help encourage an effective bottom-up approach by encouraging their citizens, businesses and academia to take part in initiatives for sustainable development.
They're actually key to doing this. They provide the legitimacy. If, like a lot of organizations who should be involved in partnerships to achieve transformation, they probably don't have the resources. So you need to set up some type of, almost like a research grant scheme that enables those organizations to participate in partnerships.
A recent UN report highlights the use of scientific evidence-based data and tools to keep track of progress and enhance policymaking to advance the SDGs. South Korea has been using open government data to improve the lives of citizens and also help them develop solutions to societal problems. Examples include a voting app on city policies and opening up a big data center to encourage startups. Experts say these cases could be strong examples of encouraging bottom-up action to induce new value creation to advance sustainable development. 오수영 아리랑 뉴스 인천.
And that brings us to the end of this newscast. Thank you for watching. More live news coming your way at 7 p.m. Korea time.
Bismar sheds light on the advanced technologies and improved competitiveness of domestic startups which have achieved remarkable growth as global